There are shoe brands in your wardrobe right now that no longer exist. The companies went bankrupt, the names were sold, and new owners kept putting those labels on completely different shoes. This video is about 8 of them. One man owned 2,500 shoe shops across Britain, every high street in the country. One brand was killed by the same company your mum took you to for your first pair of school shoes. And when you see which single empire controlled almost all of these names, you will realise this is not a coincidence. It is a pattern. Number 1. Dolcis. In 1863, a shoemaker named John Upson started selling shoes from a street barrow on Woolwich Market in southeast London. His son Frederick took over, and under him, the name Dolcis became a national chain. By the 1950s, Dolcis had more than 250 shops across the British High Street. Then a man named Charles Clore changed everything. In 1956, Clore bought Dolcis and bundled it together with Freeman, Willis, Saxone, and half a dozen other brands under one company called the British Shoe Corporation. More than 2,500 shops. 20% of every shoe sold in Britain went through his tills. But you did not think about any of that when you walked into Dolcis on a Saturday afternoon. You were 15, looking at white stiletto heels for a birthday party. Or you were a young mum buying school shoes that did not cost a week's wages. Dolcis was just there, between Woolworths and W.H. Smith, the same way it had always been. In 2008, Dolcis went into administration. 800 staff were made redundant. The remaining stores were snapped up by Barratts and rebranded overnight. Today the Dolcis name exists on a website, the shop does not. Dolcis was part of an empire. We will come back to that empire because it swallowed half the brands on this list. But the next brand was not killed by Charles Clore. It was killed by a company you still buy shoes from today. And this one did not just take down a brand, it took down a town. Number 2. K-Shoes. In 1842, a leather merchant named Robert Miller Somerville started making shoes in Kendal in the Lake District. The K stood for Kendal, and when the first Trademarks Act came into force in 1875, the Somervilles registered it. The Act banned single-letter trademarks unless you could prove 10 years of prior use. K-Shoes could. It is believed to be the only single-letter registration ever allowed on the British Register. Over the next 130 years, the family turned a leather workshop into something enormous. 9 factories across Cumbria, 235 shops, 130,000 pairs of shoes every week. In Kendal, K-Shoes was not just a company, it was the town, 20% of the working population. Nearly every family had someone on the payroll. The shoes were known for comfort. K-Shoes was the brand for women who were on their feet all day. Teachers, nurses, shop workers. You could wear them until closing time and your feet did not punish you for it. In 1981, Clark's bought K-Shoes to save it from a hostile takeover. Clark's promised to leave the business alone for 10 years. They kept that promise. After those 10 years, the redundancies started. Factory after factory closed through the 90s. On the 2nd of May 2003, the last pair of K-Shoes rolled off the production line at the Natland Road factory in Kendal. In 2021, Clark's closed the final distribution centre. 179 years of unbroken shoe trading in Kendal ended. The factory site was demolished and turned into a shopping outlet. The only shoe shop inside it is a Clark's store. A former worker said there is still a diaspora of ex-K managers scattered around the area. They remember the brand does not exist anymore. Clark's bought K-Shoes and shut it down. Later in this video, you will see that Clark's did precisely that to another brand. But the next story is different. This one involves a company that went bankrupt 3 times in 5 years. And on the night before the final rescue, the money vanished. Number 3. Barratts. In 1903, William Barratt set up a boot and shoe company in Northampton, the town that invented British shoemaking. The company became famous in the 1920s for beautifully illustrated catalogues with commissioned artwork, the kind of thing you kept on the shelf. In 1964, Stylo bought Barratts and expanded it into more than 400 shops across Britain and Ireland. And there is a detail that has been almost completely forgotten. Stylo also owned a sports brand called Stylo Matchmakers. In the 60s and 70s, those boots were worn by George Best and Pele. The same company that sold your mum her work shoes once had the greatest footballer in history wearing its boots. Then it all fell apart. In 2009, Barratts collapsed. 220 stores closed. 2,500 people were out of work. In 2011, it happened again. Another 100 stores gone. In November 2013, the administrators came in for the third time. A £5 million rescue deal had been agreed. On the evening of November the 7th, the investor pulled out. The next morning, it was over. 3 bankruptcies in 5 years. The Barratts brand was sold and relaunched online. A shoemaker from Northampton could not survive on the British High Street. Remember the empire that swallowed Dolcis, British Shoe Corporation? The next brand belonged to that same empire, and when you hear how many shops it had, you will understand just how much of the high street one man controlled. Number 4. Freeman Hardy Willis. In 1875, 3 men in Leicester started a shoe business. One of them, Freeman, was a Russian shoemaker who had settled in St Pancras, London. By the early 1990s, Freeman Hardy Willis had 540 branches, a shop in almost every town in Britain. The paper bags they wrapped your shoes in said, "For happy walking." Women bought their first shoes with their first pay packet at Freeman Hardy Willis. It was cheaper than Dolcis. The shoes came from the same factories, just finished to a lower standard and priced lower. Same company, same production lines, different label, different price tag. In the early 90s, British Shoe Corporation started collapsing. Half the branches were converted into hush puppies shops. The rest were sold to Stephen Hinchliffe through his company Facia. Within a year, Facia went under. Hinchliffe was investigated by the Sears fraud office. Sears had to book £150 million in losses. 540 branches gone. So Dolcis and Freeman Hardy Willis, 2 brands that looked completely different on the high street, but behind the scenes, the same company owned them both. The same factories made their shoes, and the same collapse wiped them off the map. If you are watching this and thinking, how did I not know any of this? Hit subscribe. We cover the stories behind British fashion and the high street every week, because there are 4 more brands to go. And the next one was once the largest shoe manufacturer in the world. Number 5. Stead and Simpson. In 1834, Edmund Stead and the Simpson brothers set up a leather merchants on Kirkgate in Leeds. They grew so fast that by 1875, Stead and Simpson was the largest footwear manufacturer on the planet. More than 3,000 workers producing 30,000 pairs a week. Their factory on Belgrave Gate in Leicester was destroyed by fire in 1886. 1,500 workers were thrown out of employment overnight. The company rebuilt everything. One of the nephews who ran the business, Henry Simpson G., became so wealthy from shoes that he single-handedly funded the survival of the University of Leicester. Without his money, there would be no university there today. By the 30s, Stead and Simpson had 250 shops, mostly in rural market towns across East Anglia, the East Midlands and the West Country, the places where ordinary families lived. This was not a fashion brand. This was where you went because you needed shoes and could not afford to waste money. By the 2000s, the company had more than 220 stores and was turning over £140 million a year. In January 2008, the company called in administrators. Shoe Zone bought the business, 37 branches shut on the spot. The name that once belonged to the largest shoe manufacturer in the world simply disappeared. Stead and Simpson is gone, and it will not be the last brand on this list to end up at Shoezone. But the next brand takes us back to Charles Clore's empire. Number 6. Saxone. Saxone started in Kilmarnock, Scotland. If Dolcis was where you bought your Saturday shoes and Freeman Hardy Willis was where you bought your everyday shoes, Saxone was where you went when you needed something proper. Real leather soles, stitching that held, the kind of shoe you wore to a christening or a funeral or the first day at a new job. Your mum might have called them her good shoes, the ones she kept wrapped in tissue paper at the back of the wardrobe. Saxone merged with Lilly and Skinner in the 50s. Together, more than 500 shops. In 1962, British Shoe Corporation bought them both. Then, in the mid-90s, Sears sold Saxone to Steve and Hinchliffe and Facia, the identical deal to Freeman Hardy Willis, and an identical ending. Facia collapsed, the stores shut, the shops never came back. Dolcis, Freeman Hardy Willis, Saxone, 3 different brands, all owned by the same empire, all dead. And remember K-Shoes? Clark's bought it and shut it down. Clark's did exactly that to another brand. Number 7. Ravel. In 1934, a married couple named Irwin and Mrs. Wise opened 2 shops in the London suburbs under the name the Tower Boot Company. Mrs. Wise also ran a separate shop called Mondaine, which claimed to be the only retailer in Britain offering made-to-measure formal evening shoes. By the early 60s, the business had caught the wave of London fashion. The name changed to Ravel. If you wanted something with more style than Dolcis offered, Ravel was where you looked. In 1967, Clark's bought a 47% stake. The Wise family retired in 1974 and Clark's took full control. A fashion-forward brand inside a conservative company. It never quite worked. Under Clark's, Ravel lost its edge. The stores aged, the product drifted. In 2007, Clark's shut down the entire chain and replaced the shops with its own name. K-Shoes in 1981. Ravel in 1967. 2 brands bought by Clark's. 2 brands gone. Clark's is still selling shoes. The brands it bought are not. And that brings us to the final name. This one belongs to British Shoe Corporation. But what happened to it after the empire fell is different from all the others, because this one did not just die, it got demoted. Number 8. Lilly and Skinner. You already know part of this story. Lilly and Skinner merged with Saxone in the 50s. Together, more than 500 shops. In 1962, British Shoe Corporation swallowed them both. Same empire as Dolcis, same empire as Freeman Hardy Willis. When Sears collapsed in the 90s, Lilly and Skinner went with it. But Dolcis at least got a website. Freeman Hardy Willis at least kept its name online. Lilly and Skinner got neither. It was quietly folded into Stead and Simpson. And when Stead and Simpson collapsed in 2008 and Shoezone took over, Lilly and Skinner came along for the ride. Today, the name Lilly and Skinner is printed on shoeboxes inside Shoezone. 500 shops reduced to a label that nobody even notices on the shelf. That is not a death. That is something worse. 8 shoe brands, and when you lay them out side by side, the pattern is hard to miss. 4 of them belong to one empire, Charles Clore's British Shoe Corporation, 2,500 shops, 20% of every shoe sold in Britain. When Sears collapsed, the brands were sold to a man who went bankrupt within a year and was investigated by the Serious Fraud Office. Dolcis, Freeman Hardy Willis, Saxone, Lilly and Skinner, all gone. Clark's bought 2, K-Shoes and Ravel promised to protect them, did not. Barratts went bankrupt 3 times. Stead and Simpson ended up inside Shoezone. And this is just the shoes. We covered 8 clothing brands that died the same way in a separate video. Between the 2, that is 16 brands that your mother trusted and that no longer exist in any real sense. If a shoe you used to love feels different now, if the leather is thinner, if the sole is lighter, it is probably because the company that made it is gone. The name is still on the box, but the people who earned that name are not behind it anymore. Which of these brands do you miss the most? Tell us in the comments, I read every single one. And subscribe so you do not miss the next video.